Have you ever wondered why some people seem to dodge cancer well into their 80s, while others receive a devastating diagnosis decades earlier, despite eating similar diets and living fairly similar lives? What if the real difference wasn't found in a hospital, a prescription bottle, or even buried in your genetic code, but in a tiny black seed sitting quietly in your spice cabinet, one that's been studied in laboratories for more than 40 years? It sounds almost too simple to be true. That's exactly why so many people over 60 have never heard a word about it from their own doctor. This isn't some brand new discovery dreamed up by wellness influencers chasing views. This seed has a documented history stretching back over 3,000 years, showing up in ancient burial chambers, sacred medical texts, and healing traditions across multiple continents. And inside a single one of these seeds sits a compound researchers say can push stem cell regeneration up by roughly 300% in laboratory settings. Stem cells are the very cells your body relies on to rebuild organs, refresh your immune system, and manufacture new blood. On top of that, this same compound appears to cut off the blood supply tumors need to survive, essentially starving cancerous growth while leaving healthy tissue untouched. So why hasn't your physician ever brought this up? Why does something backed by this much research stay buried in journals instead of becoming everyday medical advice? More importantly, if this seed truly supports your body's natural repair systems, how exactly should someone over 60 be using it? We're answering all of that over the next several minutes. The science, the research, and a step-by-step daily protocol. Before we dive in, if you find this content valuable, comment yes, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Let's start with the obvious question. If this seed is genuinely this powerful, why isn't every oncologist recommending it to patients? The honest answer has less to do with science and more to do with economics and institutional habit. Think about it this way. Pharmaceutical development runs on patents. A company invests hundreds of millions of dollars into a new drug because, once approved, it holds exclusive rights to sell that drug for years, recouping its investment many times over. But you cannot patent a seed that grows naturally in fields and has been used by cultures for thousands of years. When the National Institutes of Health published findings on the seed's key active compound, a molecule called thymoquinone, there was simply no financial engine to push it through the expensive, multi-year clinical trial process required to get something written into official treatment guidelines. Without that formal stamp of approval, doctors are never trained to bring it up, no matter how promising the underlying research actually looks on paper. Then there's a second, more cultural barrier standing in the way. This particular seed, known scientifically as Nigella sativa, has an almost startling backstory. Traces of it were even found inside King Tutankhamun's tomb, and it appears repeatedly throughout Islamic, Ayurvedic, and Greco-Roman medical writings. For a long time, that ancient pedigree actually worked against it in modern scientific circles. Researchers tend to be instinctively skeptical of anything that sounds like folk medicine, dismissing it as superstition rather than pharmacology. It's only in the last couple of decades, as reproducible and peer-reviewed data has steadily piled up, that serious labs finally started taking a second, closer look. A pattern doctors kept noticing. Physicians who spend years working with terminally ill cancer patients have quietly noticed something that doesn't quite fit the standard prognosis charts. Some patients live meaningfully longer than expected, and it isn't always the hospital treatment driving that extra time. In case discussions and clinical observations, a recurring thread keeps showing up: a cluster of anti-inflammatory, regenerative compounds certain patients were using at home, often without ever mentioning it to their care team. It's this kind of real-world pattern that's pushed researchers to take a second, closer look at the overlap between traditional plant compounds and modern cancer care. Why stem cells matter so much as we age. To understand why this seed matters, you first have to understand what stem cells actually do for your body. They're not some optional biological extra sitting in reserve. They're your entire internal maintenance crew, working around the clock. They renew the lining of your gut, rebuild your blood supply, and patch up damaged organs. Mostly, without you ever noticing any of it happening. The problem is that this repair crew starts shrinking earlier than most people realize, often beginning quietly in your mid-30s. By the time you hit 60, your cellular repair activity may only be a small fraction of what it was back in your 20s. That slowdown doesn't announce itself with obvious symptoms or warning signs. Instead, it quietly lets small pockets of unrepaired damage accumulate year after year, which many researchers believe is part of what makes older adults more vulnerable to chronic disease as the decades pass. This is where the research on thymoquinone gets genuinely interesting. A study published in the journal Phytomedicine used high-precision flow cytometry, a lab technique for closely analyzing individual cells to examine human bone marrow cultures treated with thymoquinone. What the researchers found was that stem cell colonies carrying a specific marker called CD34+, which identifies cells with full regenerative capability, increased by close to 300%. Just as notably, these newly formed cells showed fewer signs of cellular aging, or senescence, meaning they behaved like younger, healthier cells that were far better equipped to repair damaged tissue throughout the body. 3 ways this compound works against cancer. While thymoquinone appears to accelerate the growth of healthy cells, the research suggests it does the exact opposite when it encounters malignant ones, working through 3 distinct, well-documented pathways. Cutting the supply lines. Solid tumors physically cannot grow past about 2 millimeters, roughly the size of a pencil tip, without forcing the body to build entirely new blood vessels to feed them. They accomplish this by releasing a signaling chemical called VEF, or vascular endothelial growth factor. According to the research, thymoquinone interferes with a nuclear transcription factor known as HIF-1 alpha, which essentially intercepts the tumor's construction orders and prevents those new blood vessels from ever forming in the first place. Flipping the self-destruct switch. Every healthy cell in your body carries a built-in shutdown sequence called apoptosis, a natural way of retiring cells that have become damaged or dysfunctional. Cancer cells typically find a way to disable this switch entirely, which is part of what makes them so dangerous and hard to eliminate. The studies suggest thymoquinone reactivates that self-destruct mechanism, specifically inside malignant cells, by boosting a tumor-suppressing protein called p53 and triggering what's known as the caspase cascade. In side-by-side comparisons, cancer cell lines showed significantly elevated death rates, while nearby healthy cells were left completely alone and unharmed. Removing cancer's camouflage. Tumors often exploit a signaling protein called NF-κB to build an inflammatory environment around themselves, which effectively hides them from your immune system's normal surveillance patrols. Thymoquinone is described in the research as a strong natural inhibitor of NF-κB, calming that inflammatory signal and stripping away the tumor's camouflage so your immune system finally has a real shot at recognizing and eliminating it. 5 studies worth knowing about. The claims surrounding Nigella sativa and thymoquinone aren't coming from a single source or a lone researcher. They're drawn from work conducted at institutions scattered around the world. Researchers at the University of Mississippi Medical Center, publishing in Cancer Letters, treated drug-resistant human pancreatic cancer cells with thymoquinone. Within just 72 hours, cell proliferation dropped by more than 80%, and in follow-up animal studies, tumor volume shrank by 55% over a 4-week period. At King Abdulaziz University, a controlled trial published in Phytomedicine tested a 10 micromole concentration of thymoquinone on human bone marrow cultures and observed a roughly 3-fold increase, around 300% in CD34+ stem cell colonies over 14 days of exposure. Cairo University ran a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial published in Phytotherapy Research involving 40 patients with early-stage colorectal cancer. Those who took 2 grams of standardized black seed oil daily for 12 straight weeks showed notably lower VEGF levels in their bloodstream, reduced inflammatory markers like CRP and IL-6, and a measurably improved ratio of protective T cells. A molecular biology study out of the University of Heidelberg, published in Oncotarget, found that thymoquinone achieved full suppression of NF-κB in breast cancer cell lines at concentrations realistically achievable through everyday dietary supplementation, performing on par with synthetic drugs still under development, but without their harsh toxic side effects. Finally, the National Institutes of Health conducted a large systematic review covering 133 published studies and concluded that thymoquinone showed clear anti-cancer activity across 19 different cancer types, with the strongest evidence appearing specifically in colorectal, breast, liver, and pancreatic cancers. The daily protocol: how much, how often, and how. Knowing the science behind something is one thing, actually using this seed correctly day to day is another matter entirely. Based on the available research, here's the protocol being recommended for daily use. Start with cold-pressed black seed oil as your main dose, 1 teaspoon, roughly 5 milliliters, taken twice a day, alongside your first and last meal. Because thymoquinone is fat-soluble, pairing it with healthy fats, think avocado, eggs, or olive oil, significantly boosts how much your body actually absorbs into the bloodstream. If you'd rather work with whole seeds instead, lightly crack about 1 gram, roughly 1/3 of a teaspoon, using a mortar and pestle before eating them. This cracks open the tough outer coating and releases the volatile oils trapped inside. Stir them into yogurt, scrambled eggs, or mashed avocado for an easy addition. There's also a morning combination worth trying. Mix half a teaspoon of black seed oil into a full teaspoon of raw, unprocessed honey, and take it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, before your coffee. A compound in raw honey called methylglyoxal appears to work synergistically alongside thymoquinone, amplifying both its antioxidant and its anti-inflammatory effects. For those who simply can't stand the sharp, bitter, peppery taste of the raw oil, standardized capsules are a reasonable alternative. 500 milligrams, taken twice daily. Just make sure the label specifically states it's standardized to at least 1% thymoquinone. Generic black seed powders without that standardization often contain almost none of the active compound worth taking. You can also build in a simple culinary habit. Dry toast whole seeds in a pan for about 90 seconds, then sprinkle them over roasted vegetables, grain bowls, or hummus. This won't replace your primary dose, but it adds fiber and heat-stable plant compounds as a nice daily reinforcement. Finally, consider pairing it with cruciferous vegetables, specifically 1 cup of broccoli, steamed for exactly 3 to 4 minutes. Research out of the University of Pennsylvania found that combining thymoquinone with sulforaphane, the compound found in broccoli, produced an apoptotic effect roughly 70% stronger than either compound used alone. Just avoid boiling or microwaving the broccoli, since heat destroys the enzyme responsible for activating that beneficial compound. Tips straight from clinical practice. A few practical notes can make a real difference in how effective this entire protocol actually turns out to be. On storage, thymoquinone breaks down quickly when it's exposed to heat, light, or open air. Look for cold-pressed oil, packaged in dark glass bottles with a visible harvest date, and once you open the bottle, keep it refrigerated at all times. If it starts smelling dusty or stale instead of sharp and pungent, the active compounds have likely already degraded. Be patient with the timeline here. Rebuilding cellular infrastructure isn't instant. The human trials showing measurable changes in tumor markers and stem cell activity typically required 8 to 16 weeks of consistent, uninterrupted daily use before results became apparent. If you already practice intermittent fasting, try taking the oil right at the tail end of a 14 to 16-hour fasting window. Fasting triggers a cellular cleanup process called autophagy, which may prime your cells to respond even more strongly once the oil is finally introduced. And don't skip the black pepper trick, adding about a 1/4 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper to meals eaten alongside the oil. A compound in pepper called piperine temporarily slows down the liver enzymes that break down thymoquinone, which extends how long it stays active in your bloodstream. Who should talk to a doctor first? Because thymoquinone behaves like a genuinely active pharmacological agent, and not just a mild food additive. A few specific groups need to check with their physician before starting. Pregnant women should avoid it altogether, since animal studies have shown uterine contracting effects that make it a poor fit during pregnancy. Some of that same research also points to potential effects in early fetal development, which is reason enough to steer clear until more human safety data exists. People taking blood thinners, warfarin, aspirin, or newer DOACs should get medical guidance first, since thymoquinone carries mild platelet-inhibiting properties of its own, and combining two blood-thinning influences at once can raise the risk of unwanted bruising or bleeding. Anyone dealing with low blood pressure should also be cautious, as the seed exerts a modest natural blood pressure-lowering effect that could compound existing hypotension, potentially leading to dizziness, fatigue, or lightheadedness if it stacks on top of blood pressure medication you're already taking. It's a good idea to monitor your numbers closely during the first few weeks, if you fall into this category. And if you're currently undergoing active chemotherapy, it's essential to coordinate closely with your oncology team, since thymoquinone can influence how the liver metabolizes other medications, which may either weaken or intensify the effects of certain chemotherapy drugs, depending on the specific regimen. People managing diabetes should also mention it to their doctor, since some research suggests it can modestly lower blood sugar, meaning insulin or oral medication doses may occasionally need adjusting. None of this means avoiding the seed entirely. It simply means starting with medical supervision rather than guesswork, especially if you're already managing multiple health conditions at once, which is common for many people over 60. Mistakes that undo all the benefits. A handful of common missteps can quietly sabotage this entire protocol before it ever gets a fair chance to work. The biggest one by far is buying oil based on reviews alone. Plenty of commercial black seed oils are processed using high heat or never standardized at all, leaving them with essentially zero active thymoquinone, despite the marketing claims. Always check that the label specifies a thymoquinone percentage of at least 0.5% to 1%. Another common mistake is giving up after just 2 weeks. Most of the biological changes tracked in these studies simply don't show up that fast. The research consistently points to a 90-day minimum before you'd realistically expect to notice a genuine shift. People also tend to treat it as a standalone fix for everything. Black seed oil isn't a substitute for the basics: quality sleep, regular movement, and a vegetable-rich diet still form the essential foundation, and this seed only amplifies results that are already built on top of that foundation. And finally, never heat the oil directly during cooking. Pouring it into a hot pan destroys its medicinal value almost instantly, since thymoquinone starts breaking down above roughly 180 degrees Celsius. Always add it raw, or drizzle it over food once the cooking process is finished. It's worth being honest here. Nigella sativa isn't a miracle cure, and nothing in this video should ever replace real medical care from a qualified professional. What the research does suggest is that it's a well-documented biological tool, one that doesn't rewrite your genetics, but instead gives your cells the specific molecular support they need to run their own built-in repair and defense systems more efficiently. For older adults especially, that kind of support can matter a great deal, since those internal systems naturally slow down with time. As we age, so much of staying healthy comes down to giving our bodies the right raw materials to keep doing what they're already designed to do. Whether it's through a teaspoon of oil each morning, a sprinkle of toasted seeds over dinner, or a cup of properly steamed broccoli alongside it, small, consistent habits like these are often what separate the people who thrive well into their 70s and 80s from those who don't. If you're over 60 and looking for one more evidence-backed tool to add to your daily routine, this ancient seed might be worth a real conversation with your doctor. If this video gave you something worth thinking about, do us a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this kind of information reach more people who need it. Subscribe if you want more videos like this one focused on aging well and staying strong later in life. Drop a comment below sharing your own experience, and share this with a friend or family member who could benefit from it too. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.